now? All right. Hello and welcome to Grizzly Talk. You are here with me, Megan McKay. This is Grizzly Talk, tough talk for challenging topics. And today we have our special guest, Michael Sugrue. Am I saying that correctly? I hope.
Sugrue.
Sorry, I killed it. Michael, please
No worries.
introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
It's a long story, so I'll try to keep it short, but I'm originally from the San Francisco Bay Area in Northern California. My law enforcement career started actually in the military in 1998. When I graduated college, I went straight into the Air Force as a second lieutenant in security forces, which is basically anti-terrorism, force protection, air-based ground defense, law enforcement, nuclear security, foreign airfield assessments. I served 6.5 years active duty. I served in the Middle East, South America, in Europe, all over the United States. I got out in 2004 honorably as a captain, and I went straight into civilian law enforcement back here in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was hired by the Walnut Creek Police Department, which is about 20 minutes from San Francisco. Nice city. During the day, it's about 100,000 population, medium-sized police department. I worked various assignments from patrol officer to field training officer, detective. I was undercover 2 years on a California state drug task force. So basically like the DEA for the state of California. I was promoted to sergeant with 8 years on in 2012. And as a brand new sergeant, I was involved in a very critical incident, and it was a fatal shooting where unfortunately I had to take a life in order to save other people's lives. And that incident really changed everything in my life. It changed my path. It led to a lot of negative things. It got to the point where it was so bad I didn't want to be here anymore, and I literally wanted to die in the line of duty. And it was another very tragic incident which finally gave me the strength and courage after years and years of suffering in silence to ask for help. And in 2017, I started my journey of recovery from post-traumatic stress injury. And that's why I'm here. So now that I'm on the other side of this, I medically retired in 2018. And now I speak all across the country to both military members and first responders about mental health awareness, suicide prevention, post-traumatic stress injury, like I like to call it, versus disorder, and giving people hope that, you know what, you can actually heal from this injury and things can get better. And so I'm on a mission to smash the stigma when it comes to talking about mental health.
That's fantastic. And I like that you changed that disorder part because I do the same thing. I call them struggles or issues. They're just aspects of our life. It's not the entirety. It's a little piece. Sometimes it gets bigger, but it's a part of a whole. And what did that
Absolutely.
What did that journey look like for you for recovery?
Well, it started with a phone call, and immediately after that, fortunately, I was connected to a culturally competent clinician, a therapist who solely worked with military members and first responders and actually had been doing so for many, many years. She was also involved in the West Coast post-trauma retreat. So that was absolutely instrumental. You know, I started seeing her every single week, and then she told me about some first responder support meetings that I had no idea existed, but they're all over the United States. They're not associated with any kind of agency. They're run by volunteers. It's simply a discussion meeting, and it's confidential. You know, no one knows anybody's last name. They don't know their agencies, and it's only open to first responders. Whether you're retired, you're off on injury, if you're still working, it doesn't matter. But as long as you've been a first responder, you can come to these meetings. And so I started going to those every single week. A few months into my recovery, I went through the West Coast post-trauma retreat, which is a week-long residential retreat, again, only for first responders, so paramedics, dispatchers, firefighters, police officers.
Mhm.
And that was really fundamental as well. I mean, all of these things led me to find out that, I wasn't alone, because for so long I thought it was just me. I thought something was wrong with me. I thought that the feelings that I was having, the effects both physically and mentally, I just thought, it was me and it was
Mhm.
nobody else. And come to find out, you know, it's as a result of many different things and different layers of trauma, some going all the way back to childhood, some just being exposed to hundreds and hundreds of traumatic incidents on the streets, incidents I never talked about, I never processed, I just stuffed them up inside. And that shooting I told you about was really my tipping point. So it wasn't, that the shooting caused all of this, that was just my breaking point.
Mhm.
And then on top of that, and I talk about this extensively in my new book, is moral injury, as well as what I call administrative betrayal or institutional betrayal. And that's where,
Mhm.
our blue family, in the case of law enforcement, or red family for the fire department, green family for military, when they turn their back on us when we need them most, that really, in my opinion, has the most dramatic effect. And that's kind of usually the thing that pushes most people over the edge into suicide. And, suicide is the number one killer for all first responders. And I almost became one of those numbers. And by going to therapy, going to these meetings, going to the West Coast post-trauma retreat, eventually I tried medication.
Mhm.
After that, when I medically retired, I thought I was done, but I wasn't. And I realized that, I had processed all of my work-related trauma, but I never really dealt with my early childhood trauma, which in my case really wasn't on the severe end of the spectrum. I would say it was more on the minor end of the spectrum, but I didn't realize the domino effect of that in my, law enforcement career, and especially when it came to the administrative betrayal. So I ended up going to another program called Save a Warrior,
Mhm.
and Save a Warrior is open to both military members, current and past, if you're a veteran, and all first responders. And that program was very unique because it only dealt with the complex post-traumatic stress injury. It only dealt with that childhood trauma. And so, I was able to deal with all of these layers separately, even though they were related. It's kind of like peeling back an onion.
Mhm.
And I had to deal with all of these individual things. And so after Save a Warrior, that was like that final piece that I needed. And after that, eventually somebody asked me to be on a podcast interview, which I didn't want to do. And the guy kind of harassed me, thank goodness, and got me to the point where I agreed to do it. And that's what changed everything for me, because at that point I was still ashamed and embarrassed of my story, of all the things I'd been through. In fact, most people that I worked with had no idea why I medically retired. They had no idea of all the things that I went through, and the suffering that I endured. Lost my marriage, my career, literally wanted to kill myself. And they had no clue. And so when I did this podcast interview, I literally just answered everything straight from the heart. I didn't worry about how things sounded. I didn't craft my answers. When I was asked a question, I just answered straight from here. And the magical thing that happened was, when this podcast got aired a few weeks later, and it got aired all over the world, I was really thinking I was going to get hateful messages or messages from people that I knew, just derogatory, kind of shaming me. And none of that happened. In fact, the opposite happened. And I started getting messages from Canada, from Australia, from the UK, from all over the US on how my story resonated with them. And they
Mhm.
started sharing their personal, dark stories with me. And that's what really gave me hope. And it's like every time I started to share my story, it's like more of this burden came off my shoulders, came off my back. And it
Mhm.
got me to the point where eventually I started public speaking, now to where I speak across the country. And eventually that actually led to a book, which I wrote with a clinical psychologist, Dr. Shauna Springer. And now it's an international bestseller. And this book is, it's saving relationships, it's saving careers, but most importantly, it's saving lives. And it's given me purpose. I mean, this is my purpose in life now, to share my story in hopes that people will see that they're not alone, and that, there is hope, and more importantly, there is help.
You brought up so many um, areas of mental health that I deal with daily, in terms of the layers of your life as it is compared to being of an onion. And there is a lot. You can always go deeper and further, but the thing that really stuck out to me was the first responder meeting. We had one of those in Phoenix, actually, and there was a main person that they would go through to be vetted, and they would change locations. And I'm trying to bring that up here to Missoula. It was such a fantastic setup because I would get first responders all the time in my rooms, and they can't go to support meetings because of that fear of safety.
No, absolutely. These meetings, and again, I had no knowledge of them, and now, I know they're everywhere. But the particular meeting that I go to, and the ones in my area are actually run by volunteers who have already been through the West Coast post-trauma retreat, and they're very well connected with culturally competent therapists and clinicians. And so, when you go to these meetings, of course, there's that family environment, a trusted environment where you're meeting, fellow brothers and sisters who they get it. They're sharing, they're healing, but they also have invaluable insight to all these resources that I had no idea. I didn't know about any of these resources. I knew about the ones associated with my department. Even back in 2012, we had peer support. We had a culturally competent therapist. We did like annual training, but I didn't trust those resources. I didn't use them. I don't think most people used them. And so to find these meetings where it was anonymous and I wasn't worried about somebody running into me or somebody going to my command staff and sharing things, the gossip mill, that's what really made the difference. And I still go. I don't go every single week. But every few weeks, I pop back in, I go to these meetings, and it's like I get a refresher. It's like I get a rejuvenation to just, remind me that I'm not alone. And these meetings aren't just to talk about, work-related stuff. It's to talk about anything and everything, just like you would with a therapist, whether it's relationship issues, family problems, health issues, financial problems, addiction, alcoholism, a traumatic event at work. It's free range, and it was just so freeing and healing to be given that opportunity.
I love that. I need to find and potentially connect with someone who might be able to connect me with individuals who can help me with that project here. Yeah, it changes lives, especially with having that support. It is so necessary. And then the work culture certainly doesn't support that.
Absolutely. One thing I'll tell you is that in our book, we have a whole resource section, and it's going to list what I'm going to tell you right now. But if you Google the First Responder Support Network, again, First Responder Support Network, FRSN, they're the ones that run the West Coast Post-Trauma Retreat, also known as WCPR. But on their website, they've got like a main menu. You click on it, it's got other options, and there's a resource option. And when you click on that resource option, there's actually another link that says First Responder Support Meetings. And it opens up a PDF. It has the city. It has not the actual location where it's at, but it has a phone number of the person that you call so that they can vet you, and they'll tell you the location after that. But you can go online like right now, people that are watching or listening to this, and they can start right there.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that information.
Absolutely.
I'm definitely going to do that. Tell me a little more about your book. What is it called? I know you said you had it written with a clinical psychologist, and it talks about your trauma journey. Is there anything else that you wanted to add about that?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I'll tell you how the story started. So the book is called Relentless Courage, Winning the Battle Against Frontline Trauma. And again, just like, sharing my story, the podcast, speaking, I never envisioned any of this. I never planned for it. I never even thought it would be possible. And so I want to let you know how this all got started. So right before COVID, At that point, I had been speaking. I was very out there on social media, just sharing things about mental health and suicide prevention. And Dr. Shauna Springer, also known as Doc Springer, she's a PhD. She's a clinical psychologist. She graduated from Harvard. At that point, she'd already written 3 books. I didn't know her. She didn't know me, but she reached out to me on LinkedIn, which is one of my biggest platforms, and said, "Hey, I would just like to have a phone call with you just to, tell you what I'm doing and also to find out about what you're doing." So I'm like, "Yeah, of course, let's do this." And so she calls me up and she tells me about her work with a medical procedure. And again, we talk about this at length in the book, and I've since had it done, but it's called SGB, or stellate ganglion block. And she is the chief clinical psychologist for Stella. And Stella is based in Chicago, but they train medical doctors, MDs, all over the world, including Australia, on how to do stellate ganglion block. And again, it's a medical procedure, and it's solely to treat the physical symptoms of post-traumatic stress injury. And so, and even back then when she told me about this, I was like, yeah, this sounds kind of strange. I've never heard of it. But I was interested, and I decided that I was going to, do my own research. And sure enough, there's like a 60 Minutes episode on it. It's been around for like many years. So there's literature, there's research. And so after that, she asked me my story. And I tell her my story in great detail. And afterwards, she just asked me, she's like, "Have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I kind of laughed, and I said, "Well, I've briefly thought about it, and I've been asked this before." I said, "But with post-traumatic stress injury, I don't have that drive, that focus, that concentration, that motivation that I used to have. And I honestly don't think I can get a project like that done." And so we just left the conversation at that, said goodbye and decided to stay connected. And a couple weeks later, she hits me back up and she's like, "Look, Michael," she said, "my work as a clinical psychologist," and she worked with the VA, so Veterans Affairs, and also TAPS, which is the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. And she said, "I've heard hundreds and hundreds of trauma stories." She said, "But your story, I think, is going to help save countless lives." And she said, and not even, I haven't even met her. This is only our second phone conversation. She says, "I want to make this book happen. I want to do this book with you." And I just knew in my heart, I knew this was right. I said, "You know what, let's do it," without even meeting in person. And then COVID happens. And so we started this project literally on Zoom. We did weekly Zoom meetings for 2 hours long, where I went all the way back to my childhood through present day, sharing my entire story in just gripping detail. And then what she would do is she would provide her insights, her analysis, her clinical breakdown, but in very easy to understand terms. So every chapter has 2 parts. The first part of every chapter is my story told in my voice, but the second half, Doc Spring comes in and she again explains everything. She shows the real human behind the badge and behind the uniform. And this book, it's not just for first responders. It's not just for military members or their family members or their loved ones. This book is for every single person out there. And I guarantee you that something, if not many things in this book, will resonate with every single person watching or listening to this interview. And, since it came out, so that we didn't have the Audible at first, we published this in April of 2022. We had the hardcover, the paperback, and the Kindle. We self-published on Amazon. But this thing took off, and it ended up being a bestseller for over 34 weeks. It's been a #1 bestseller in both Canada and the United States. Right now, I believe there's already 535 reviews on Amazon alone. I mean, literally multiple paragraphs, heartfelt, just life-changing reviews. And then this July 2023, Doc Springer and I went into the recording studio and we decided to do the Audible because we got so much feedback from, combat veterans, people who had sustained a traumatic brain injury, people with post-traumatic stress. They either didn't have the focus or the ability to really sit down and read a book, or they just didn't have the time. And so we went into the recording studio and we recorded this entire thing in our own voices. And I'll tell you, when we did it, there's no other Audible like this. I mean, I relived every experience in that recording studio. So when you hear it, it is so, so very powerful and so personal. And it just will knock your socks off. And I guarantee that you will not stop reading this or listening to this once you start it. Absolutely won't be able to stop.
I like that you recorded it in your own voice, and I'd imagine it was your part, your story in your voice, and her analysis in hers, right?
Absolutely, it was. And that's the thing, is that who better to tell our story than us? And, Doc Springer also shares parts of her story. She shares personal things and traumatic things that she experienced in her life as well. And so she had to relive those. So yeah, I mean, it's just, I couldn't imagine hiring somebody to go into a studio and, just read our story. It's like, no, I want you to be there with me through it. I want you to feel it. I want it to be all encompassing. And that's what makes this so powerful.
Beautiful, yeah. What has your experience been observing your colleagues in those fields within the military and as a first responder? What have you seen generally with trauma?
Well, I'll tell you that things generally have gotten better, but I will tell you that we are so very far from where we need to be. And, I speak all over the country, and depending where I go, I mean, it's night and day. Some agencies truly have a culture of wellness where they have leaders who are open and vulnerable themselves. And I think that's fundamental and key to this whole thing, this changing this culture, is having leaders at all levels who are willing to be transparent, open, honest, and vulnerable so that their people can trust them and feel comfortable doing the same. But I've also seen where a lot of agencies just play lip service to this. They don't buy into it. They don't believe it. They've got these things on paper and they tell people we've got this wellness program and this and that, but nobody's using it. Nobody's using these resources. And the suicides are literally off the charts. And even the best numbers that we have from groups like First Help, they are so far underreported. I mean, my estimate, at least 3 to 4 times underreported. And for law enforcement especially, year over year, the suicides outnumber the line of duty deaths every single year. And I hear about suicides almost on a weekly basis, many that never get reported, many that never get talked about. And so, even though things are getting changed, there is so much more work that needs to be done. I mean, we're not even close to where we need to be.
It's frightening.
It is, but that's why I'm on this mission. And if it means one life at a time, so be it. Every single interview I do, and I've done over 80 around the world, different countries, every time I speak, if somebody picks up this book, I know it's making a difference. And that's what it takes. It's that domino effect. Once one person is helped or saved, then they can share their story, and then they can help others around them, and it keeps growing and growing and growing. And that's how we beat this. We make it okay to, I don't want to keep saying it, but it's okay to not be okay. But what's not okay is to sit with that and not do anything about it. If you're not okay, it needs to be okay to ask for help and for your agencies to wrap their arms around you and support you and not throw you to the wolves or throw you out on an island, because that's what's going to push people over the edge. And that's, again, is what's so powerful. And, I was very hesitant to talk about this in my book, to talk about the administrative betrayal and the institutional betrayal, but that's actually the number one thing that is resonating with most readers and listeners, because it's kind of like the dirty little secret where we're all ordered not to talk about these things because like we're under investigation or, they don't want it getting out. And so it turns out that we're all under investigation. We're all getting into trouble. It's like there admins coming down all around us all the time, but no one's talking about it. And that's the thing, is that we need agencies to support us. It's bad enough we have communities out there who don't support police officers. I mean, they may support firefighters and paramedics and dispatchers, but many don't support police officers. You know, even politicians, many don't support us. And how bad is it when our own agency chiefs, our sheriffs, our police chiefs, they don't support us? You know, who's going to want to do this job? And that's another issue, is that now that's resulted in a nationwide crisis when it comes to staffing. Almost every single police department is understaffed as we speak.
It's a very nasty, what do you call it, domino effect when it comes to you have overworked and traumatized, because automatically in that line of duty, you're going to have trauma with what you see and what you have to do, on top of whatever might be in the past with other forms like developmental, if there is. And then not have that support, which is a betrayal, which is a form of trauma also, and also to have it so stigmatized. If you talk about it, you're going to be shamed. And
Absolutely.
that's probably, I mean, those are the biggest hurdles that I see. And there's a lot of this attitude of pick yourself up by your bootstraps, you know, just move forward, pretend it doesn't happen. And I will tell you, as a trauma expert, that is the worst thing you can do. So I absolutely agree. There needs to be more talk, more addressing of this issue. It is okay to not be okay, and that silence kills lives, kills people.
It does, and you brought up a good point. I kind of mentioned this earlier. We talk about it in the book, and you know, I was in denial of this, but I'm going to tell you right now that most, not all, but most first responders have some form of childhood trauma. Now, let me clarify that, okay? As I mentioned, it can be on the minor end of the spectrum. It could be just a parent who is always working. You know, they're providing, but they're not home. Maybe they're not affectionate. Maybe they're not expressive of their feelings or emotions. Maybe they're, you know, they don't show their emotions. That would be like what I would consider very minor. In my case, my biological father was a drug addict and an alcoholic, which during my early teen years, and I didn't realize that effect on me till later, but that created this kind of abandonment issue that I had, which got exacerbated when my blue family, my administration, turned their back on me. But the ironic and also let me take it a step further, you know, also people have things which I would consider on the severe end of the spectrum, which is physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse, you know, whether it's by a family member, a family friend, a stranger. But these early childhood experiences, actually, ironically enough, they make us, you know, resilient. They allow us to overcome adversity. We become decisive, decision makers, caretakers. It actually makes us very good at what we do. It makes us very good first responders. But like in my case, and I would say most first responders, I literally forgot about that. Like, I just pushed away my childhood. You know, I had a great mother. I had a great stepfather. I had a good upbringing. I just literally kind of forgot about it and went on with my life. I never dealt with those issues. And so now you're a first responder. Now you're literally dealing with all this crap on the street. You know, you're seeing just the most traumatic events day in, day out, suicide, homicides, you know, fatal car accidents, major injury accidents, child abuse, you know, sexual assault, even just natural deaths. But you're seeing these at a level which most people, 99.9% of the population, will never see or deal with. And we're dealing with literally hundreds and hundreds of traumatic incidents. And we don't process them. We don't deal with them. We just brush it off. We pretend like nothing bothers us. Nothing's going to affect us. In my case, I didn't talk about it at home. I didn't have those healthy relationships with people that I could just fully open up to. You know, I didn't believe in therapists at the time or peer support or any of that stuff. And then on top of that, you have moral injury, which, you know, we haven't really discussed yet, but let me just give you an example. So like moral injury, in my case, one example would be, is in my shooting, it was a guy with a large butcher knife that was trying to kill a couple barricaded inside their bedroom. And then this subject tried to kill myself and my fellow officers. And so unfortunately, I had to kill him, not only to save our lives, but to save their lives. And, you know, there was multiple investigations. I got sued. I went through a 4-year federal lawsuit. I ended up on trial. We got cleared on everything. Got cleared on the investigations. We saved the couple. They testified they were alive. We saved our own lives. We even prevailed years later in a federal court in San Francisco. But I still have to live with the fact that I killed somebody, that I took a human life. And that affects me now. It will affect me for the rest of my life. And it doesn't matter that it was right, that it was justified, that it was under policy and procedure, that it was covered by the law. Morally, it's wrong to kill somebody. And I did. And so I have to live with that. And then on top of that, for the fourth layer, again, you have this admin betrayal or institutional betrayal. And so you just have layer on top of layer on top of layer on top of layer. And it has that compounding effect. And they all need to be dealt with. And so again, we have to normalize this. We have to bring it out. We have to talk about it. And in my case, I didn't do that. I didn't talk about it in my military career. I didn't talk about it in my law enforcement career. It took me to the point where I literally wanted to kill myself. And it took another traumatic incident where my best friend actually did try to kill himself. And that's what saved my life, because a month after that is when I finally got the strength and courage to ask for help. And he lived, thank God. And he's got his own chapter in my book. He's a Vietnam veteran, 35-year reserve officer. But he literally saved my life by trying to take his own life.
That is, trying to think of the right word for it. Such a reality, and just, I guess, darkly beautiful. I'm not thinking of a correct descriptor for it, but it's very powerful.
It is. I truly believe that everything happens for a reason. And looking back, all the hell I went through, and we haven't even hit the tip of the iceberg. It's in the book, but most people, when they meet me or hear my story, they're like, "How are you still here? Like, how are you still alive?" And I'm here for a reason. I endured all of that for a reason. And now that I'm on the other side of it, I wouldn't change a single thing. I wouldn't change it, because where I'm at today, I think I'm a much better person. I have a whole different viewpoint on people, on life, and I'm living life to the fullest, something I never did when I was working. I'm still focused on my career, on the next assignment, next promotion, plus of what was truly important. And what's most important is our family, our loved ones, the people who really care about us, the ones that actually have our back.
Completely agree. I have my own past of horror stories, and even just a little bit that you let out it always just horrifies another person, but I wouldn't change it for a thing. It made me who I am today, and it does change your perspective on life and all of these experiences. I had my own journey through recovery, and it was probably the most difficult thing, but the most beautiful thing at the same time, because it turns your world around to such a better place after that. Your whole perspective just changed. You can actually genuinely be happy. I used to before look at people and wonder, how are they really happy? They're fake. They must be faking it, but it's not. It's genuine.
Absolutely. And people that have been through trauma, and a lot of therapists, as you know, a lot of clinicians have been through trauma, just like most people in life have been through trauma. And one thing that was profound for me was that, and we didn't talk about, I talk about in the book, is that the very first day that I met my therapist, I didn't know who she was. She was referred to me by somebody I trusted, but I didn't have rapport with her. I didn't really trust her. And she did something in our very first meeting where she shared a very, horrific, deep personal story, something that happened to her decades earlier with me. And when she did that, a couple things happened. The first thing was that, it built automatic trust with me. I knew that for her to tell me such a horrific thing, that I could trust her with my life. But also, she was living proof that no matter how bad things were, because what she told me was unimaginable. And here she is, positive, happy. She's moved on with life, married, she's successful.
Hmm.
She's dedicated her life to helping other people. She survived. She's not just survived, but she's thriving. And she was living proof that I could get better. I could get through it. And that's what makes the difference. And so, and I don't want to go into ethics or discussions with therapists and clinicians, but I honestly think that if you want to build a rapport with people, and I know you have to be careful what you share and how you share it, but if you want to bridge that gap, if you want to build that trust, you need to show people that you're human, that you're vulnerable, and that you've been through it, and that you
Hmm.
know what you're talking about. It's not just something you studied or read, but you've actually lived it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's ways that you can disclose things like that without, it's a case by case basis. But yeah, um, I agree there 100%. You have to be a person talking to a person. Um, Otherwise, you get this power dynamic of one up and one down, which isn't really reality, but like the person sitting in the chair will feel like they're less than because they're the ones with problems. And so that's the dynamic I always try to avoid. It's just a conversation. Um,
Well, plus, I think, and again, I'm not talking about the general public here because first responders are different. We're special, and you know, that we don't care about degrees. We don't care about paper on the wall as first responders. We just don't. We care about experience. We care about who you are, and we're very good at sizing people up, at reading people, at judging people, and it's survival for us. And so I
mhm.
think especially in a military first responder environment for culturally competent clinicians, I think it's much more important than just the average person that we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, just curious, did you try EMDR or?
That's a good question. So I'd never heard of it until I went through the West Coast post-trauma retreat, and that was one of the things they do, and they still do there, is that they bring in a bunch of clinicians and therapists who, you know, use EMDR, and they do it on you. And I've since observed it as well because I volunteer as a peer now.
Mhm.
So for me personally, EMDR did not work. It just didn't. But I've seen it work time and time again for many people. And this is important because people need to realize that, not everything works for everybody. And for not just myself, but most people, it's a combination of different things for people to recover from
Mhm.
post-traumatic stress injury. And you can't put all your eggs in one basket and just rely on that and just say, well, I tried this, it worked for everybody else, didn't work for me, so I give up. And you can't do that. So you've got to keep an open mind. And so I don't want to discourage people from trying it because, like I said, it didn't work for me, but I've seen it work. I mean, I've been in the room and I've seen it work time and time again for countless people. So I think it's a great resource. I think it's saving lives. I think it's helping a lot of people.
Yeah. I know for myself, I have to have a lot of different tools and um, my tool bag being those different approaches and modalities. So there's EMDR, which is effective for a lot of people, but not everybody is a candidate for it, or um, it just might not work for some reason, depending on how that individual's brain processes. So there's other forms of therapy like somatic experiencing, and the list goes on, internal family systems, that if one doesn't work, then you try the next. So I really like that message. Don't give up. Keep finding that approach. And it is a combination. I mean, you have to do a lot of body work either way. It's a somatic experience. Your body goes through this entire feeling state process, and you can't stop it. It's automatic. And it's only through those interventions that you can start to turn it around and decrease the symptomology. Um,
Absolutely. And there's a documentary called Residual. I'm actually one of the people in it. There's several first responders and clinicians in it. It came out only a few months ago. It's on YouTube, so it's free. Anybody can pull it up, but Residual. And it shows a lot of these different modalities or options for people that they can try to overcome their post-traumatic stress injury. And there's so many things out there. I mean, the
Mhm.
list just goes on and on and on. And I think people are coming up with new things, every single year, things that people haven't tried or even thought of before.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it's kind of as a practitioner, we just pick what we're most interested in and do it, and then if it doesn't work, find somebody who practices something that might too. It's very fascinating. Everything from
Absolutely.
neurofeedback to, yep. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, no, you're good.
Um, how how would you like to see things change specifically within your community regarding mental health?
Well, I mentioned earlier, the simplest thing, and it doesn't cost a dime, is for leaders. And so I'll use a police department example.
Mm-hmm.
People think it's just the very top, like the chief. But in a police department, even as just a patrol officer, you're a leader. Because if you've been an officer for 15 years and somebody just graduated the academy, you're senior to them. You know a lot more than them. You have a lot more maturity, a lot more life experience. But then we have things like field training officers, corporals, sergeants, lieutenants, captains, commanders, deputy chiefs, chiefs. But we have many different levels of formal leaders. And what we need is we need all these levels to be open, to be vulnerable, and to be transparent. And, to share their stories of how they overcame these obstacles, whether it was in their personal life or at work, but to get rid of these like perfect images that they all want to portray. They want to pretend like they have a perfect career, they've got a perfect life, perfect family, there's no problems, there's no issues. And I say BS because we all have issues. We all go through things. We all experience things, personally,
Mm-hmm.
familial, on the job. And again, it's like, no, just be a person, be a human. Stop worrying so much about your bars and stars and start worrying about your people. And again, this doesn't cost a single dime. As an example, I spoke at a police department here in California, not far from where I live. Before I did, I sat down with the chief for like 4 hours. We had a real great discussion. And then I ended up meeting this lieutenant, and I heard another story. And this wasn't planned, but the department had like an annual training. And
Mm-hmm.
this lieutenant, who had a very successful career, he'd been involved in a bunch of traumatic incidents. He had faced, a lot of personal things as well, but he had overcome them. He had done therapy, done all these things, but nobody knew about that. And he decided at this training to share his story, to share about all these things that he went through and endured and how he overcame them. And he shared that, from officers that had just graduated the academy all the way up to the chief and, people that had been there 20, 25 years. And again, didn't cost a dime, but it was genuine. It was heartfelt. It was honest. And that's all it takes. I mean, that's literally how simple this solution can be, is by creating that culture where it's okay to talk about this stuff. It doesn't have to be a big deal. Like in my case, we had a critical incident debrief for these huge events, and we even had one for my shooting. But I didn't believe in those, and I used it as a fact-finding mission. I didn't share anything about what I was going through, what I was experiencing, my feelings. And I should have. I was the leader. I was the ranking person that was involved in that shooting.
Mm-hmm.
And that could have been an opportunity where if I opened up, because I was already dealing with stuff, having nightmares, not able to sleep, just having issues at home. If I would have opened up, who knows? Maybe other officers, my subordinates, they would have opened up. And maybe it would have started a discussion, And my point is that if we have this culture where we just do this, we can talk about issues as they come up on a daily basis and not make it a big thing where we need a huge debrief and bring in psychologists and therapists. I mean, literally, we can just get things off our chest, process it, and move on, as opposed to just stuffing it away, pretending like it's not going to bother us. And then guess what? One day, and we never know what our breaking incident's going to be. It's not always the most severe incident, but for whatever reason, that one incident makes us lose it, and it pushes us over that edge.
It's because you compartmentalize so much. You can only stuff so much into those compartments. They start overflowing into every part of your life. And That's usually that event that spills out, causes that, all the other stuff to start overflowing too. So yeah, the general just destigmatization is probably the most powerful factor when it comes to creating environments that are healthy, especially in the workplace, and that genuineness. Just from what I know, and I've never been in that field, but it is something that you just don't talk about because, if you're going to partner with someone, you don't want to think that they have any issues, or, there's considerations for if you are pulled into court or you getting promoted. So all of that, and there's all of these reasons, and it's not just that. And in terms of first, the profession itself of first responders, it's also like that in the military too. So
Absolutely. I mean, it's that way in every walk of life. I mean, I even look back at the height of my trauma. I was being sued. I was going through a federal lawsuit, but I was also going through a nightmare divorce. And, I thought to myself, well, I certainly can't ask for help or even talk about this stuff because they're going to use it against me in the trial. And then my ex-wife is going to use it against me, trying to get custody of my daughter. And so these are factors and considerations that I think anybody will think about, is the ramifications on their life. But again, I think that's more when you get to that breaking point that I talked about where, you're suffering in silence for an extended period of time and all these bad things are happening. But we can prevent all of that by just, like I said, discussing things and getting off our chest as they're happening. And it doesn't have to be this huge ordeal.
just treating people like they're human is really,
Absolutely.
at the end of the day.
Compassion, being compassionate, being empathetic, putting yourself in their shoes and, trying to see it from their viewpoint. And the thing is, the ironic thing about this whole thing is that, if you increase the mental health of our first responders, especially police officers, that directly relates in better communications with society, with the public. It results in less, erroneous uses of forces, less, bad shootings. Like, it's just the domino effect. It's in a positive way. When you have healthy officers, both physically and mentally, everyone benefits. Not just the officer, of course, their family members, but society, the whole community benefits from this.
Yeah, the circular effect. So it sounds like you're incredibly busy. What would, with speaking and your volunteer support, which is your favorite part? What is your favorite activity of all of those to do?
I really enjoy speaking in person when I'm in another state, places I haven't been, where I'm meeting new people for the first time. And the thing is, when I go to a conference, I don't just pop in and speak and leave. I attend the whole conference. I like to see other speakers. I like to meet people on the breaks. I like to meet people during the social functions. And that way, usually by the time I speak, like if I'm the closing keynote speaker, I've already started to form some of these relationships and friendships. And they have no idea like what my story is or what I'm going to be talking about. And then I get up there on stage and I tell my story, anywhere from an hour and a half to 3 hours. And afterwards, the real reward is when I have people lined up who want to talk to me and they want to share their story. They want to talk about what they're going through or what they have been through. And, and then the nice thing is sometimes I'm there for a few days after I speak. And so I'm talking to people on breaks, on lunch, at night after the sessions have ended. And that's the part I value because I've made so many, close, lifelong friends at these events. Like literally people who I met for the first time, but because of our vulnerability, like our openness together with me sharing and them sharing, we bonded. And now we have this friendship literally for life. And there's nothing else like it. I mean, it's so, so rewarding.
Yeah. So many different types of individuals that you get to know and experience and help at the same time. So, yep, it's a fun part of the conference world. What what do you see going forward from here? What are your plans for your work?
Honestly, my primary focus is my daughter, so I'm fully retired. Even my speaking, I limit it to only 4 to 5 times a year. It's not something I want to do full time or all the time.
Mhm.
And so I am really focused on living life to the fullest. And so my only plans are to continue to doing what I'm doing. I'm trying not to take on too much. I would say that a goal or a dream of mine is that, our book, Relentless Courage, gets turned into a mainstream movie where people all over the world can watch it and it can even have a greater effect. That would be literally my dream or my ultimate goal.
Mhm.
But until that happens, it's truly living life. It's not taking each day for granted. It's being present, not just physically present, but being here mentally and emotionally. And that's really what matters most for me now.
I like that. The family focus and the balance are so important. We get so busy every day running and doing that we lose touch with the things that we have already. Um, okay.
Absolutely. And I never used to be that way. I was only focused on my career, and that's the thing is that didn't matter. The day I left, I realized I was just a number filling a position. As sad as that is, all those great things I did during my time as a police officer, it was forgotten about almost immediately after I left. And now, I would say 90% of that police department, I don't even know the people that work there, 90% of the people, because there's been so much changeover. So
Wow.
again, it's focused on what matters. The job, yeah, it matters. I mean, making a difference, it matters. Um, but what really matters is our loved ones and our family members. And I think I'm making a difference now on a whole nother level. I think I made a difference as a police officer, but I think I'm making much more of a difference now.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm very grateful for that. I mean, we definitely need more than therapists out there talking about this stuff. Like, this is something I know because I see it day in and day out. But from the other side, especially, somebody needs to bring it up. Talk about what the reality is of being in that environment and its effects. Because those jobs are certainly necessary. We can't do without them. We've seen what happens in doing without them, and it's not pretty. So we should
Absolutely.
take care of those who take care of us. Um,
Amen.
well, I really appreciate you taking the time to interview with me today and us on Missoula Community Access Television. We're going to be wrapping up here in just a few minutes. Is there anything else that you wanted to add or tell us about yourself, the book, mental health, trauma in general?
Yeah, so the book, again, Relentless Courage, Winning the Battle Against Frontline Trauma. It's available on Amazon. It's online at Barnes& and Noble, at Walmart.com. But on Amazon, there's the paperback, the Kindle, the hardcover, and it's also on Audible in our own voices. I highly, highly encourage you to pick it up, to listen to it. I promise you, it will change your life as you know it. And don't just stop there, but let your family members, your loved ones, let them listen to it or read it as well. And you're going to see a dramatic effect. You're going to see lines of communication that have never been opened up before. As far as myself, if you do read or listen to it, I want to hear from you. I want to hear from every single person. I want to hear what your thoughts were. I'm on pretty much every social media platform. I check my messages daily. Just type in Sergeant Michael Sugrue I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, X, Truth, Parlor. I mean, you name it, I'm on it. So again, I want to hear from you. I want to hear what your thoughts are. And I promise you, I will get back to you.
Excellent. Yes, I know that's how we ran into each other in the first place. So you definitely are very interactive with all of those platforms. Thank you for your work, Michael, and I really appreciate the time that you took to interview with us today. And thank you for being with me here on this Wednesday night, Missoula. Have a wonderful week. This has been Grizzly Talk, Tough Talk for Challenging Topics, and I am Megan McKay.